All right, well, let's kick off. I'm sure it will be a full hour of discussion, so I want to leave enough time to hear from our fantastic panelists that we have. But thank you everyone for joining. We're very excited to be holding WIM's second panel discussion. We had great discussion and engagement from the audience in the previous panel discussion, and I think with this topic of climate change and how the mining industry is addressing the climate challenge, I think we'll have just as great of engagement. So just before I jump into the discussion, I want to let everyone know, feel free to use the chat function to share perspectives, to ask questions. There is also a Q&A function as well. If you have a specific question you'd really like to see answered, I'll be monitoring that. And I will try and incorporate the questions as they come in and as they're relevant to the questions that we're on throughout the panel. But if I don't get to it right away, I will do my best to try and capture all the questions at the end. So we have about an hour together. We're going to be talking about COP28 and climate change and how the mining industry is addressing the climate challenge. My name is Katherine Arblaster, and I am the VP of Sustainability and Decarbonization for a group of Canadian and US mining companies. So this is a topic very near and dear to my heart. Very excited that we have Sonia and Nathalia with us to talk about climate change and how their companies are addressing the climate challenge. And just to kind of set the stage, as many of you know, COP28 is around the corner. It kicks off November 30th and runs until December 12th. And COP is the annual climate change conference held by the UN. And many of you will be familiar with COP21 when the Paris Agreement was signed and over 200 countries committed to keeping temperature rise to well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius. As we know, for those who've been following this space, we're not currently on target to hit the 1.5 degree warmings. We're very likely actually to hit 1.5 degree warmings in around the 2030 timeline. So a lot of work is still needed to be done. For this COP session, starting in a couple of weeks, COP28, really the goal is to try and keep that 1.5 alive. And to really ensure that there's commitment from the global community around reducing our carbon emissions and aligning to 1.5. And I think, from an industry perspective, the mining industry, does contribute to climate change, but we've seen a lot of progress from leading organizations in this space. And I think there's a lot that as an industry we can learn from one another. And continue kind of to work together to address the challenge. So excited to have Sonia and Nathalia here to talk about what their organizations are doing, as well as answer some of the questions from the audience that we have. So why don't, I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Sonia, why don't I kick it off to you to introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Katherine, and hello, everybody joining us. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Sonia Gupta, Director of Sustainability for Dundee Precious Metals. We are a Canadian-based gold mining company with operations in Bulgaria, a smelter in Namibia, and development projects in Serbia and Ecuador.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. Nathalia, how about you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Katherine, and thanks for inviting us for this wonderful panel. That's going to be a great discussion as always, and so thanks for inviting. So my name is Nathalia. I work for Pan American Silver as Manager Environment. We have, now that we had acquisition of Yamana, we have 11 operating mines in 7 countries. Our main commodities are silver and gold, and we have open pit mines, underground mines, so lots of challenges and different characteristics. So that's Pan American Silver. We are based in Vancouver, our head office.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Nathalia, why don't I get you to start with our first question, which is, can you share a little bit about what Pan American Silver is doing when it comes to addressing climate change?
Yeah, so when I was thinking about this question, and getting back a few years ago when we were doing like various different initiatives, and we kind of were having a hard time to put all together, we think about TCFD and how TCFD helped us to kind of give us a framework to put together everything we were doing, see what we were doing, what else we could do extra. So TCFD was a great framework to kind of help us structure our initiatives. Well, having said that, we have our governance well structured now. We have our board really involved in our climate change initiatives. We inform them on a regular basis about what we are doing. Then we have our management team, so our senior leaders. They are responsible for implementing and developing policies, procedures, um, evaluating risks and opportunities, adaptation methods and paths, and also reviewing all the metrics we have. So those ones were the main things that we can see that's important for a company to structure from the governance level. But I really want to emphasize how important it is to have the operations working with us, right? We all work together. So we talk about TCFD and how to disclose our information, but that's just because our operations, they are doing the projects, they are identifying the opportunities to reduce energy use. They are doing all the hard work at site, and we need to make sure they are engaged and they are on board. So on the site level, they are responsible for identifying projects that have potential to decrease energy use, GHG emissions, and we are really proud that we have that engagement with them. So those are our main initiatives and just high level.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Nathalia. And I think we should circle back on maybe directly how each of the organizations is kind of tackling climate risk or like physical risks, for example, at sites, and then also talk about kind of decarbonization, because I think those are two areas that our audience will find really interesting and kind of get to also some of the practical examples. But Sonia, why don't I give you the opportunity to share a bit about what Dundee is doing as well?
Sure. So we've been on this journey for quite a while. At our Chelopech mine in Bulgaria, we actually developed our first carbon management plan in 2011. And so through those efforts, we were actually able to double production at one point without increasing emissions. So we were able to gain a lot of efficiencies there, which we then learned and took across to our smelter, where we were able to invest in energy efficiency improvements. Our Ada Tepe mine, which came online in 2019, was actually purpose-built and designed to be as energy and as emissions efficient as possible. And then in 2020, that's when we did the internal work to identify our risks and published our first TCFD report. And within that report, we had also announced that we were going to do the work to put out a set of public targets, which we then did in 2022. So we set a well below 2-degree ambition target of reducing our scope 1 and 2 absolute emissions by 2035, reducing by 37.5%. And we also announced a net zero ambition. But knowing that, scope 3 is probably the largest proportion of all of our non-operational emissions, we also recognize that we needed to do more work to really understand the impacts across our value chain. So at the same time that we had announced our climate targets, we'd also announced that we are going to take a couple of years to put together a scope 3 target, which we have committed to publicize and come out with by 2025.
Okay, great. And I think we should definitely circle back to scope 3, because that's always a big question, I think, and an area of conversation that is extremely hard to tackle. And it's something that for UEC, Uranium Energy Corp, which is one of the companies I work with, we are currently going through a scope 3 study to understand our material scope 3 emissions. And it's been a lot of effort on the part of, the whole team. But maybe, taking from, what each of you are doing, and I love the mention of the TCFD, because, for those on the line who might not be as familiar with it, I think this is one of the most important disclosures that from a sustainability and climate perspective, organizations are now starting to put out, and it really speaks to what are the risks associated with climate change. with respect to the company so that investors have that awareness. So it looks at what are the physical risks. So what are the increased risks, for example, with higher temperatures, maybe increased storms, things like that, that may affect your infrastructure, your mine sites. And so really providing more transparency on that, as well as the transition related risks and opportunities. So for UEC, we just went through our first TCFD disclosure, which will actually be disclosed in a month, but isn't actually public yet, but I can speak a little bit to it. And really, I would say the effort there was really across organization. It was at each and every site, working with the teams to understand, how was the infrastructure built and what was the infrastructure built to be able to withstand, for example, and understanding what are the potential scenarios at each of the sites in terms of, increased weather storms and increased temperature rise. So a lot of effort, I think, to actually to do a thorough job in understanding climate risks and then also preparing to mitigate against those. So would love to hear maybe from both of you just the process you've used at your own organizations and maybe any insights that you found from that, the TCFD process overall. Maybe Nathalia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, if I can add to what you were saying, Katherine, on our physical risk assessment, there was a funny discussion a couple of weeks ago because we are going through external verification for TSM towards sustainable mining. And there is one specific protocol for climate change. And the first indicator is about corporate and about all the studies and about governance, how we conduct those studies and how we analyze those studies. So we did a first physical risk assessment around 4 years ago, and it came out that we don't have any physical risks based on the scientific data available for the countries where we operate. Mm. And then the external verifiers, they were asking us, so you don't have any risk. We said, based on the scientific information, we don't. We are taking precautionary approach in terms of designing our infrastructure for closure, especially, but based on the scientific data, we don't have physical risks that we should consider at this moment. We are updating this study, and that's one thing that we are really proud of. We have a frequency to update those studies to make sure that we are using the most up-to-date data, but that might happen. And so then what do we do? But then we have an extreme event at one of the operations in South America. How do we deal with that? Is that a climate change, or that's just natural climate happening, and that's an extreme event, but nothing that we would capture based on the climate change scientific data? So that's been an interesting process because we start thinking that maybe it's not only about the scientific data available. Then we start thinking broader about other perspectives and perception and other information available that might not be measurable. And that's a challenge also when you'll be talking to engineers. I'm an engineer, so are we going to use other information that's not data? So how does that come into play? So that's been a very interesting process for us because of that, right? We are not addressing risks because in theory you don't have any physical risks. That's from the part of physical risks. So when it comes to transition risks, then there are a lot and a universe of risks. But yeah, I thought that would be good to highlight that. And how we are dealing. We are not just saying, no, yeah, we don't have risks, and so therefore we are not doing anything. We are trying to find other ways to make sure we are covering all the main aspects of that.
Okay, great. Well, we had a very different insights and findings from our risk assessments. Maybe I'll share those after, but we'd love, Sonia, to hear a little bit about the process you guys used and any insights you found from your TCFD.
Sure. We tried to make it as collaborative as possible between functional employees and people at site, operational colleagues. And we found that just the framework itself was quite instructive on how to think about the problem, how to think about the risks, but I think for us, particularly, how to also think about the opportunities that a company could seize from everything that's happening around climate change and decarbonization. With physical risks, I mean, we did identify, the threat of wildfires, lack of availability for processed water, and other things. And I mean, that was great to surface. It was, it wasn't new to us, but I think it was great to kind of surface across a larger, broader group of employees, and really help to serve as capacity building internally, which is always something that's good to focus on in this space. And then I think it helped us to even think about how do we now integrate climate into our enterprise risk management system. So take it out of just, a siloed sustainability function and really build it across the organization. So we found a lot of value just in the process itself, aside from also communicating the substance.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think it's a very good process to go through, especially as an organization just starting out on this journey, because there's a lot of learning that happens at site and at the corporate level around what are some of the risks, but also what are the real implications of climate change. Like, that was a really interesting conversation I think we had across all of our sites. And, what we found is we had a myriad of risks associated with physical risk. I mean, forest fires was certainly one. We have sites in Saskatchewan have already experienced forest fires, not directly impacting our sites, but to the extent where the smoke was so thick that we actually did have to evacuate sites. So very real risks that I think teams have already kind of felt the implications of. And then similarly, we have sites in Texas, and hurricanes and severe storms are, probably something that's felt at a frequency of, and not a scientist saying this, but maybe once a year. But, recognizing that there will be an increase in that over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then really us diving deeper on what is our infrastructure able to handle, and making sure that, do we have the right emergency plans in place should that come to fruition? What should the employees be prioritizing? How would they react in that situation? And so I think it was also a good reminder for us of, we actually do have a lot of the, mitigating plans in place, but a good discussion came out around how often should we be reviewing these emergency plans and doing emergency drills and preparing for things like extreme storms, and kind of those reminders of how to actually deal with those events when they do occur. So a very good, I think, exercise for any organization to go through, because a lot of great learning that takes place. I think another big part of the TCFD is also kind of in the metrics and targets and strategies piece, which is how do you think about decarbonization, and how do you actually change your own operations, processes, et cetera, to ensure that you're reducing your emissions over the longer term. So Sonia, I know you mentioned you guys have targets in place for scope 1 and scope 2. Would love to hear a little bit about, what that plan entails and how you landed on the targets that you did as well.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that really helped to inform our target setting was actually we did our TCFD analysis prior to setting our targets. And I think that the analysis around the transitional risks, the strategic risks, really helped to inform our target setting and the eventual levers that we could use to decarbonize, and the how the world will change and the pace of change, which is coming at us. I'd say, with our target setting, the process, we did it. I sort of see companies doing it one of two ways. A lot of companies will do it bottom up, where they identify, of course, their impacts, their emissions profile, but then how can we actually, pull certain levers, and where will we decarbonize, and put a MAC curve over that, and how much will it cost, and really try to have a bit of the answers first of how you can actually achieve the target, and then have that help you to set your target, which is a perfectly fine way to do it. I think, the other way, and the way that we chose at DPM, and I think it's actually one of the things that I'm really proud of, is the top-down approach, where in our case, we really led with the recognition that this is not only a business imperative, but a moral imperative, and decided to take real leadership on the issue and led with the ambition level of coming up with targets that were well below 2 degrees in alignment with Paris. And, having some awareness of the levers, but knowing that, we have the talent and the innovative capabilities to figure it out and map it out afterwards. And, I can say that was very well received internally, and, our executive team and especially our board showed a lot of leadership around taking that approach. And in fact, our board even expressed that they don't want us to use offsets for meeting our interim target. So really committed to making absolute reductions in our operations for that 2035 target. Net zero obviously is a different story, as it's quite technology dependent, and we have to see where the world is going. But that's kind of how we approached our target setting.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Sonia. And Nathalia, I know sounds like you guys are on that journey still as well. So be curious to understand how Pan American Silver is approaching setting targets and kind of achieving those targets as well.
Yeah, so we had set target for 2030 and 2050. And we used the other approach Sonia mentioned. So we kind of used the bottom up in partnership with various departments at corporate and also with our operations. We kind of developed energy profile. That was what Sonia mentioned, using the life of mine plans and understanding our energy use. And from there, what are the improvements we could do on our site? So one of the challenges is we have mines that are going to close in 5 years. So what type of investment you can do? It's an old mine closing 5 years. So what are the initiatives we can deploy at those mines? So we did that, but now with the acquisition of Yamana, we are gonna need to rethink about our strategy. We are planning with the finance team to do a new energy profile and understand those new mines and think about goal setting, update our baseline, and discuss. And I think what Sonia said is great. I think the top-down approach is also really, really valuable. I think it shows leadership for sure. And I think we can, learn from the experience we had setting targets for the first time and see what else we can do to improve our goal setting approach. And we have like great projects at Teamings at one of our sites here in Canada. We have one person dedicated to that, identifying projects. And all of that identification process is really important when we choose the bottom-up approach, right? So we have our operations heavily involved in this process, which is a challenge too, right? Because you have to engage, it's a mindset. And considering that we are operating in different countries, it's a different maturity level across all of them.
Yeah.
Information available, it's hard to, some places they don't have information available. So how can we align our goals or our projects to a low emission scenario if we don't have data available in that country, right? It's different in Canada. In Canada, we have more information available, right? So it's been a process, and we take into consideration various aspects. And I feel that's a slow approach and slow process to set a goal.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think at UEC, we kind of used a combination of both the top down and the bottom up. And so for our existing facilities, we did kind of exactly how you described, Sonia, which was we built our emissions profile across all of our sites. We looked at what are the big abatement opportunities. We priced out all of those pieces. And in part, I mean, I think we had a bit of a different narrative on the top in terms of we want to be ambitious. We want to be able to set a target. And, it was kind of the school of thought of my CEO, Amir Adnani, which was, I don't want to set a net zero for 2050 target because I'm not even going to be CEO in 2050. So let's set something that's in the short term, or something that, I can at least, be able to work towards and contribute to, and feel like I'm owning it a little bit more, which I love that ambition. But, I think to balance that, it was also, well, we can't say something publicly until we know how we're going to get there. So a lot of work was done to understand the big abatement opportunities. And I think we found some really interesting, combination of things, which I think we can dive in with each of the panelists as well. For us, it was, a lot of energy efficiency plays, which we've already been kind of working on. A portion of it will be, well, for us, 78% of our emissions actually come through scope 2, which is purchased electricity. And the reason for that is, for those facilities specifically, it's in situ recovery, so a different type of mining method, which is very, electricity reliant and involves more processing of uranium. So for us, it was, we need to think about, can we build distributed energy? Should we be thinking about building a solar farm near our central processing units? And also, can we think about renewable energy credits or an arrangement with our existing utilities to actually enable us to decarbonize faster? We were a little bit surprised that not all of our utilities were offering renewable energy credits, because, I'm Canadian and it feels common for the utilities here, but I guess in Texas and Wyoming, it's not as common of a thing that they get asked all the time. So, we've kind of been on that path of, we're now doing a deeper dive on the, how solar panels can benefit us, and then also looking at renewable energy credits. And then for our own scope 1 emissions, we've really looked at, changing some of the processes just inherent to our operations. As well as, so for one of the examples of that is changing a propane dryer into an electric dryer, which would reduce emissions significantly, as well as looking at carbon capture, because inherently the drying of uranium releases carbon emissions. And despite that we've looked at all the options, there just isn't a way to abate that. So I would say one of the really interesting learnings that came out of this, or I think co-benefits of all of this, was just the amount of engagement that we got from the site teams. And, having been new to the organization at the time, I was kind of worried there was this big mandate, we needed to get everyone involved. But generally speaking, people were really excited to tackle this new challenge. And I think, it makes sense. You're talking to engineers, you're talking to chemists, you're talking to these very, technical and highly intelligent individuals. And this is kind of a new, exciting challenge that they get to tackle.
Mhm.
So I was excited about that, and just the level of engagement we got. And then I'll say, from a top-down approach, we're actually looking at, how do you build a mine to be net zero from the start? And so that's for our Saskatchewan assets, our Rough Rider assets specifically, where we're looking at net zero mine design plans. And, I think with EVs becoming more common and the price slowly going down, as well as some government subsidies that are in place in Canada, at least, there's a lot of opportunities now to actually really rethink the way that we think about mine design, and the emissions profile of mine design. So a lot of exciting things, I think, happening. I think we'll see a lot more of that as well over the next 5 to 10 years. But Sonia, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, I know, some of both maybe the challenges, and then also some of the, achievements and progress that you've made against some of these decarbonization plans.
Sure. And I think just sort of finishing up on the last question, although we did lead with that, top-down approach, once we did announce our targets, I mean, we very quickly went to the very detailed bottom up, as is necessary for companies. And we found that, for us too, scope 2 purchased electricity represents the bulk of our operational emissions. And I think through that work, we really realized that it's we can't do this on our own. And it's, partnerships and collaborating with our suppliers are really, I mean, that's going to be the key for us to decarbonize, especially with our current assets, which, we've already captured a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And, I think the key to actually achieving our targets will be with our future assets. And so, those emission profiles are unknown today. So what we're really focused on is taking our targets and integrating it across our organization, so that it's not just an operational decarbonization focus. It's how do we we just started this year. We built a process to pilot carbon considerations into the capital allocation process, how to capture it in your OpEx budgeting process. We've started building carbon considerations into the M&A due diligence process. And again, I think going forward, Katherine, what you were speaking to, even into like the design process, how do we design from the beginning? And we've also, we do have 2 development projects in Serbia and Ecuador, and we, even in those developments, are trying to see where can we optimize for carbon so we don't have to retrofit later, and we can, bring on a lower emitting mine. But with all of these advances, obviously there have been challenges, and I think when you are reliant on your partners, that the challenges will come. And I think for us, we aren't a utility, and we don't self-generate renewable energy yet, at least at any of our current sites. And so, we did engage with a great partner to purchase green electricity. But what we learned, which we weren't really aware of, was similar to the mining industry and the kind of permitting and regulatory delays that we face to bring a mine online. Same with the renewable energy providers, at least in the jurisdiction that we were operating in. And so, because of the permitting delays on their end, it's been a challenge for us to be able to, I guess, delayed to be able to procure that green energy. Similarly, we decided to partner with one of our OEM suppliers on trying to test out battery electric vehicles in our underground mine, and that I think is going to be key to helping us to reduce our Scope 1 emissions. But because of global supply chain pressures, they are also delayed in getting the materials they need. And so, we have a delay there. So I think that, those are 2 specific examples of challenges. But I would also say, bringing it up a notch, just modernizing policies and regulations in general to be able to enable the energy transition, and what we need to do in mining and all the adjacent industries that are going to enable us to help meet our carbon targets is going to be key for us to be able to achieve what we need to achieve as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And, we've also experienced similar delays, and I think just shortages in some of the equipment that we might need going forward, right? And I think it's because also a lot of the large mining companies have started thinking about this already. We're probably a little bit late to the game, and they're now planning for it, but a lot of things have already been ordered for the next several years, and so we're trying to like get ourselves on the respective list to be able to have the EV mining equipment that we might need for our Rough Rider project, for example. And so, Nathalia, I'm going to go to you as well to hear about some of the specific decarbonization efforts and also some of the challenges and achievements. But one additional question for you, Sonia, kind of on the topic, or kind of connecting those pieces around progress against decarbonization, as well as some of the challenges, and then also the overarching reduction targets. So interested to know how, from an executive level, Dundee approaches it, in the sense of, are you tracking decarbonization progress every year against the target, or is there kind of this recognition that it takes a while to usually see the reduction in targets? And so I'm curious, like, what's the mindset? Is it, we need to see a reduction every single year, or we're patiently waiting to see all of our efforts take place?
Yeah, so it's a bit of both. I mean, obviously, decarbonization is not a linear process where you can see year over year decreases, right? It doesn't necessarily work that way. With that acknowledged, though, we do want to, again, I call it building our carbon muscle. And we want to be able to encourage and incentivize the behaviors that we need to do internally in order to meet our targets. And so we actually have, for a few years now, captured decarbonization and now performance against our targets on our annual balance scorecard. So this is sort of a performance metrics type evaluation that helps to inform executive and employee compensation. And that's actually measured quarterly against sort of these annual reduction targets, both at the site level and at kind of the group-wide corporate level. And, and it's interesting, how do you do that when, maybe 1 year an asset might produce more, or something might happen and absolute emissions increase, because we do have an absolute target.
Mhm.
So, we're sort of talking about having those discussions now, but I think it is important for us to still track, and we do report on it annually in our disclosures. But so we do a bit of both.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. And Nathalia, interested in your perspectives on, some of the decarbonization efforts and maybe the key areas that you guys have seen progress against. And I know you spoke a little bit to some of the challenges already, but if there's any more that you'd want to mention.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll start with the challenge, so then I can connect with one of the initiatives we are doing. And that's National Grid. National Grid, our operations are located remotely, and usually either we are connected to the grid, or we have our own energy production that's not clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of the place where we operate. On those instances, we try to find, and we did find a partner to connect our electricity, our renewable energy partner, and that was great. That was one of the initiatives we did that really reduced our scope 2 emissions. And the idea is to keep trying to find partners, or even if we have some potential projects that we can build a wind farm or a solar panel farm close to our operations, and then we can kind of use that. But that's project, we are still evaluating the feasibility, considering life of mine and all other factors. I have lots of ideas, great ideas, but it's hard to sell all those ideas to our senior management, right? So I guess that's one of the challenges as well, how we find ideas, and we can see there are potential of doing something different, but then you have to engage with our leadership, and you have to engage with the sites, and it's a process. We have great projects at Timmins West, our mine here in Canada. We have identified some potential improvements on the ventilation process. That's a really high intensity energy process in the mining. So we are working on that and thinking about how the results of those projects are going to impact from now to 2030. But again, because of the acquisition, we are going to need to re-identify, I guess, all those projects and see what makes sense, what's going to be part of the pipeline, the project's pipeline, to achieve our future goal, the goal that we are going to set after reviewing our base year. So yeah, so those are the main initiatives in terms of projects, right? In terms of actual effort to reduce. But I think it's important to mention that we have formed a working group with different areas at corporate, and we are meeting frequently to discuss all the initiatives we have done, to get different perspectives. So we have people from social team, from finance, from reporting. We are planning to invite people from the site, so then we can have different perspectives, and we are all aware about the topic and about the importance of the topic for us. So I think there are two fronts. Those that are more governance that we do, that's a kind of a planning stage where we need to discuss. We need everybody to be on board of the topic. And then we have the actual projects that are going to reduce our footprint. So I hope in the future we can use more nature-based solutions. I don't remember the name of the report BC released. If anybody, as the participants, they remember the name, please put it in the chat. But I don't remember exactly the name. But they said that nature-based solutions is key, is crucial to achieve our climate goal. And usually we think about projects, we think about infrastructure, but we never talk about nature-based solutions. Rarely we do that. And because that's hard to quantify. It's hard to quantify, it's hard to implement. So I think ideally we should do a blend of strategies to achieve the goal. It's not only focus on infrastructure and that's it. It's infrastructure, it's nature-based solutions, carbon credits if necessary. We need to think about various approaches to make sure we achieve the goal. So, and I think we are in the process. That's I guess, a maturity process that we are all going through. We are improving every year. We have pressure from external stakeholders, the international world. They are all thinking about this topic and providing more insights. And I think we need to take into consideration all those aspects and perspectives.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we're all starting to realize now that there's such an interconnectedness between also nature and reducing emissions. And that really we need to think about restoration, protection, and supporting natural ecosystems while also reducing emissions, because they're highly interconnected. I see a lot of really good questions coming in. And so I'm going to move on to our next question, which I think touches on one or two of the questions in the chat, and I will try and make it through the rest of them as well. But there is a question here about suppliers and helping suppliers to achieve their goals of reducing emissions, and this idea that sometimes you may need to pay more if a supplier is putting in those environmental, emission reductions or better environmental protection. And I think maybe we can have our panelists speak to how you're thinking about scope 3 more broadly. And then also, if you can speak a little bit to the question from Nelson as well. Sonia, would you like to kick us off? Because I know you mentioned you're thinking a lot about scope 3 lately as well. So
yeah, and thanks for the question, Nelson. I think for us, we've been tracking our scope 3 emissions and reporting on them for quite a while. But this year, in advance of the targets we hope to announce by the end of next year, we've really done the work to analyze impact and influence. And I think that that's really key with scope 3. Where are sort of your biggest scope 3 impacts? But also, where do you have the most influence to work within your supply chain and create those partnerships? And so we're still in the midst of that work. And I think we're finding that, different suppliers are along different maturity levels when it comes to climate and decarbonization. And, some of them don't even have an awareness of their scope 1 and 2 emissions themselves. So, a lot of that. So for those suppliers, it's really just supporting them in the capacity building of, helping them to, understand the value of tracking this and how to calculate it and provide them those resources. But we also, have suppliers who are a little bit more mature and along their way. And we were actually pleasantly surprised that one of our cement suppliers approached us with a lower carbon cement that they had developed for a cheaper price. So I think, if you invest in really facilitating that connective tissue across your value chain, sometimes, you yourselves don't have to come up with that innovation or come up with the solutions, and your suppliers can approach you with them. So it's really just about, meeting your suppliers where you're at, where they're at, and helping to support that discussion.
thanks, Sonia. That's great. Nathalia, anything you want to add on scope 3?
Yeah, I think that question is great. And it's important what Sonia was mentioning about identifying those key suppliers. So when we talk about scope 3, especially for mining, we have our value chain, then our upstream so our suppliers and then our downstream partners. So those downstream partners are the ones with heavily emissions because of the smelters and that piece of our value chain is the one creating more emissions. I think it's not only about paying more. If I want to tackle straight to that question. Sorry, that's my style. So it's not about paying more only. I think it's a holistic exercise we need to do with our supply chain and also our downstream partners, refineries and smelters. It's not about paying more only. It's about engaging with them. It's about changing mindset. It's about what is the value that's going to add, not to them, not to us only, but to the community, to the society, to what our planet's going to. So I think the payment is a result, can happen because supplier can identify, yeah, to do all these I need to deploy all those initiatives, and that's going to cost more. But when you see the value of doing those initiatives, it's not about paying only. It's more than that. So it's beyond money. That's my perception.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. And I appreciate the head-on answer because that's always nice. It's just the direct. And I would agree with you in the sense that, like, for us, like, we're still very early in the scope 3 process. So we've really just over the last year done a study on our scope 3 emissions. And for us, we're still trying to nail down what is, and I think you put it really well, Sonia, the impact versus influence exercise. Where can you have a big impact, but you have enough influence as well to be able to shift and or switch or, use a bit of your influence to reduce emissions. And so for us, what we found was, we started with where can we make changes that there is same cost and just lower emissions. Like that was kind of what's the low hanging fruit option. And then we've moved to what's very material for us. And if there is no equivalent low emissions option, what more do we need to pay? And then it's a discussion against management. And we've done the same thing when it came to scope 2 in the sense of we certainly are paying more through procuring renewable energy credits where we are doing that, which is at our Palangana site. And it was a choice where these are material emissions for us that we want to address and we want to be able to reduce them, and therefore we will pay more. So I think it's a really good question, Nelson. And I think every organization also approaches this differently. And I think it really also comes down to materiality of those emissions and that supplier. Because like with scope 3 especially, you cannot prioritize every emission that is in your value chain because it's way too challenging even to get that data.
Yeah, and Katherine, sorry, I would just add that it's a bit of a multifaceted decision because you can't just evaluate your suppliers on just their emissions. Obviously, there's commercial consideration and criteria there, but also human rights, social considerations. Especially if you're buying local, what's the impact on communities if you decide that this is a higher emitting supplier? Well, maybe you can't just drop them because they're also helping to contribute to jobs and wealth generation in your community. So it's really, I think, like most things in sustainability and climate, it is multifaceted and interdependent across different areas.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sonia. And it is very much, especially when it comes to sourcing locally. I think there's a lot of other considerations, right, for the positive benefits that provides as well. I see a question here around what are the various organizations' approach to carbon offsets. And I think this is very topical as well. So very interested to hear, and I'm happy to share as well how UEC is approaching it. But Nathalia, why don't you start for us how you guys are thinking about carbon offsets?
Yeah, so what we are thinking, and we are kind of doing. I'm working with some people at the site, some biologists and my colleagues, about understanding how much carbon sequestration we can do with the work we are already doing at the sites. So that's not easy to quantify. It's not easy to quantify. We have a partnership with Nature Trust BC, also that helps on that carbon offset, but we really want to take, I guess, the lead on that in terms of understanding how much our own initiatives can offset carbon. We are trying to evaluate the tools available and see which ones could be recognized, because that's the other thing, right? Sometimes we understand we have a methodology, but that's not recognized, and how we are going to disclose that in our sustainability report or to external stakeholders if we cannot, if you don't feel comfortable, or external stakeholders don't accept that as a tool to evaluate that. So I think we are at the early stages of that. As I said before, I think there is potential for all of us to do more on that. And not only doing partnerships with companies that could do that for us, but also us doing more as a company and understanding our potential to do carbon offset.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathalia. And Sonia?
So we're at the beginning of that journey around carbon offsets. As I stated before, we aspire to not use carbon offsets to meet our 2035 interim target. But I think it may be a reality for a lot of organizations, generally, especially for their net zero, especially when it comes to, the residual scope 3 emissions, for example. And so I think, for us, we're still learning and really identifying opportunities about carbon markets generally, right? Both the regulated compliance markets, because I think there could be some opportunities there if policymakers can connect those markets and create a global linkages. And then I think also with the voluntary carbon markets, the offsets, I think I would just say proceed with caution. And I think we're, cautiously learning, and because there's not enough, just in my personal opinion, I don't think there's enough sort of oversight there and transparency to really gauge the quality of the offsets, double counting, carbon leakage. And so, the prices that are being paid, and really at the end of the day, the impact that they're making. So, and we've seen a lot of scams surfaced recently around that. So, so we're still learning, and I think it's something that we will, strategically consider for the longer run net zero.
Yeah, Sonia, and I would say we're similar in our approach, in that I think as an organization, we feel like we're still learning. We're still trying to wrap our heads around how the verification processes work and how we can ensure that, they feel legitimate in nature and are actually contributing to the impact that's provided. And so we've found that, we did decide to buy offsets for previous fiscal year and then this fiscal year. And the approach that we decided was, because this was something we wanted to do, because I would say in the long term, we don't plan to use offsets as a part of our overall reduction of emissions. We're still focused very much on decarbonization. However, if we can use it as almost a portion of our community investment, so can we invest in offsets that are local to our sites, that are contributing to the community development and have different co-benefits for our local sites? And that's something where we felt it was contributing to multiple aspects of our sustainability program. So I would say there's a challenge in oftentimes finding that right offset, especially when you come at it with the lens of we want to create a certain type of impact, not always available. So we have had to compromise a little bit on some of those things, but we viewed it as where can we drive impact? This is both contributing to local communities as well as reducing emissions. And so we've always, again, because we don't feel like we're experts in the offset market, we've kind of said for now, just based off the way that, there's voluntary regulation and how everything's shaping up, we're going to use a selection of verification schemes that we feel have some legitimacy in the market, and then just try and align to those ones or find things that have been verified by those regimes. And but I think it's something that kind of, as you both have mentioned, like it's just something that's quickly developing and changing quite a bit. And so I think as an organization, we're constantly just keeping our eyes on it and trying to keep up with the changes happening in the offset market. And so I think there's one question on how we manage our environmental data, which is a great question. I'm sure probably is a challenge for every organization here. And so just because we have 5 minutes left, and I know everyone probably needs to jump to other calls or lunch and different things after that. So maybe if each of you want to touch on, data management, and then if there's anything else that you would want to share, just kind of in closing, please feel free to do that as well. So Nathalia, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Data management is also always an issue. And at Pan American, we still manage our data through Excel files. We are now going through a process of implementing new systems and tools, but our team, we are very analytical. So I'm going to talk more about how we review things, right? Data in the Excel, yeah, it's not good. We all know that. But the reviewing piece of the amount of data that we need to report now is crazy. It's crazy, right? So how can we make sure that the data we publish is accurate, make sense, and represent reality? So that takes a lot of time from everyone in this company, from analysts to VPs. And I don't know if there is much. I mean, there are tools that we can use to help us managing that data. We can set up rules and everything, but at the end of the day, that's a hard work to do. Data management is not easy. We think that's if I use a software that could help me, yes, that's gonna help you on certain areas. But how about the input, the quality of data entry?
Yeah.
So it's more than just using nice softwares. There are an educational process. So then we have external audits or assurance process that could help us kind of improve our internal controls to generate the data. But at the end of the day, it's a hard work to do. It's a hard work to do. It's analyzing trends, and it's not only about the nice number we see on the report. There is a whole process behind, an educational process that we have to do every year with the sites to explain why we need, and they hate us, right? So when we send a form there with more questions, they say, why do we need to report all that information again? Or why do we have more information to report? So then we have to have their buy-in again, explaining why we need to have more data, why do we are managing more information this year, because every year that number is that those requests are increasing from ESG analysts, from new standards, new frameworks, and it's hard for them, right? I agree with them, because it's hard for them. They have other priorities at the sites to take care of. So how do we balance that? How do we manage that information with them? So it's not only about the software and data management, but it's the whole process behind that. That's hard. It's challenging.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sonia, anything you'd want to add? And
So,
we can wrap
yeah,
this
just
up. as well.
Really,
Approaching the
really
end.
quickly, I'd say, data management is not just an ESG thing. It's, in all data thing. And so I'd say, digitization is key, but it's not everything. As Nathalia was saying, change management needs to come with that. We don't want to replicate spreadsheets. You want to, be able to add more value. And at the end of the day, it's not about more data. It's about smart data. And you essentially want to get more than just insights. You want to be able to get foresights.
Absolutely. And that's a great note to end on because I completely agree with that. And thank you everyone so much for joining. We really appreciate the questions and the engagement. And thank you, Sonia and Nathalia, for the great discussion and insights from your organizations and from yourselves. We very much appreciate it. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.